organized at all. Well, you know, you're around, top of the night. And what a true place to live. Basically, we just wandered south from, Sydney Street and then over University Park. Stephanie can make me think, the other in the distance. The other. Great. Doesn't seem to satisfy Corinne.
How's it going?
Good.
How are you? Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks. How's your little person doing?
Good.
Yeah. What new stuff is happening?
She's babbling a lot.
Okay.
Like a lot of ba.
3 months now?
No, she's almost 7 months.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Did she say mama or dada yet?
No.
Okay.
Baba is the closest.
My little one says grandma now. My little one says grandma now. Although he doesn't say grandma, he says grawa.
Grawa? That's awesome.
And he says it whenever his parents are doing something he doesn't like. You know, like making him put clothes on.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I'm here with Cambridge Transcriptions. I will be one of the reporters.
Okay.
The other reporter is Cameron Briggs.
Okay.
And nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you too.
Okay, thank you.
What
Yeah, he
happened
says-
to the woman who used to transcribe?
So it's apparently kind of a different idea. So
She lost?
she didn't get the bid for this year.
Huh.
But so these are different people than the guy who's been here.
Yeah.
I think it's the way cities work. They're competitive nature and service.
chance to disclaim the dot. I'm sorry? Here's your chance to disclaim the dot. I'm not later. Not a dot, it's a period. That's a nomenclature question.
What?
All right, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 23rd meeting of the Planning Board. We'll start with the update from Community Development. Jeff, is that you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, Iram's double booked at another meeting, so I'll try to make it pretty quick. We've got 4 items to review on the agenda this evening. Upcoming Planning Board meetings we have scheduled are next week, April 30th. There will be a public hearing on a zoning petition to create something which is called the Ware Street Innovation Space Overlay District. We'll be hearing more about that. That's all we currently have scheduled for next week, and then the following meeting we have on our schedule is May 14th. At that, we anticipate having a continued hearing on the Cambridge side PUD 8 zoning petition. That's for the mall site. A few other upcoming things, just one announcement. You may notice we have some new faces, Cambridge Transcriptions, who are filling in with the transcriptions and minute service for this evening. So nothing has changed procedure-wise. Please, everyone, speak into the microphones and make sure the microphones are on. If you're walking around the room, there are handheld mics that you can use. And please make sure to, as always, pronounce your name and give your name and pronounce and spell it for the transcription purposes. So that's just one announcement. On other meetings of note, this week is kind of a busy meeting week. There will be a meeting of the Climate Resilient Zoning Task Force tomorrow evening. It's just a reminder for those of you on the board who are members of that group. And on Thursday, there will be a Housing Committee meeting to continue the discussion of a potential affordable housing overlay that will be incorporated into the zoning. So that's all I would say for right now, except just one quick thing, just a sort of a public service announcement is many people know and maybe have been hearing the zoning for cannabis retail stores and other types of cannabis establishments that was adopted by the City Council last year has gone into effect. We expect to be getting applications. There has been a lot of active interest. Many of you are aware that you can go to our website and find a page that lists pre-application meetings. The Planning Board, as some of you recall, made a rules change requiring community meetings for every application before it gets sent to the Planning Board. And if you look at that page now, you see there's quite a list of potential cannabis retail establishments. So it will be an interesting time once those applications start coming in. That's all, unless there's any questions.
Thank you. Are there any transcripts to adopt? No. Okay, fine. Then 6:30 having come and passed, we will have a public hearing on Planning Board number 346 relating to 23 May Street. It's a special permit application by Seni Development LLC to convert the existing two-family house to a single-family and construct a new single-family structure on May Street, which is over 75 feet from Vineyard Street, pursuant to sections 5.53, more than one structure on a lot in a Residence B district. The proponent?
I'll get started. My name is Billy Sene, the owner of Sene Development and part of the building team, development team, working on behalf of 23 May Street, the owner of the property. Wanted to just start by introducing some of our team. Our team is mostly sitting in this area. It's some of my staff and also the owner of 23 May Street. We've been working on these plans since about October in various stages, and then behind me is Peter Quinn, the architect, and his staff. Together we've all been working on this for some time. I want to start quickly with just a brief synopsis of our process and how we got to where we are today, and then I'll let Peter talk more specifically about the design. So we started this project. The project itself is known as 23 May Street and 32 Vineyard Street. It's a corner lot and in B zoning. And we started this project planning to do 2 single-family dwellings. There's an existing structure there. We always knew we were going to do a partial demolition, create some space, and then add a second dwelling. And being a corner lot, we always thought, great, this will be very simple. We'll have one house facing May Street and one house facing Vineyard Street, and they'll appear very single-family style. They'll be condominium ownership, feeling very much like single families. It'll look wonderful in the neighborhood, and then we got looking into the details and discovered that we needed to come here for this special permit. In that process, we've had since November when we started designing, we've gone through a number of community interactions. The first being in our attempt to get the new curb cut on May Street. That was started by neighborhood knocking on doors, leaving business cards as part of the special permit required to get our curb cut, which we did get through the city council earlier this year. So there were a number of meetings with the direct butters, at which time any of the ones that we actually were able to get in touch with, Nick did most of that, were told about the concept. They were told they were going to do the single family here and add a new structure over there. And ultimately, we did get through 2 city council meetings. We did get that curb cut and actually now have a building permit for one of the houses. Then further to the outreach, we also held a community meeting earlier in the year. I think it was March 23rd, and we flyered the neighborhood and held an open house style meeting at one of our offices in Central Square. We had some moderate attendance, but almost no outside of that reaching out to us. And I think it's actually because most of the neighborhood had already heard quite a bit about it because of the curb cut. But we did have a couple of tenants who just wanted to see the plans up close and talk about it a little bit with us. And overall, the feedback was positive. It was that they liked the concept. They liked the feeling that it was going to be 2 single-family homes. They liked the separation that the one curb cut went with one house, one curb cut went with the other house. And the only bit of consistent concern actually related to trees, and we addressed that with the neighbors that were in attendance at the meeting. explained that our intention was to maintain as many of the trees on site as we possibly could, and had already made efforts to do that. Even subsequent to that meeting, we did hear that one neighbor had wanted to attend, another local architect actually, named Maggie Booz, and we made arrangements and met with her in her office subsequent to that meeting. So we've been talking to the neighborhood quite a bit about this project, and I feel pretty good. Actually, a lot of the comments that we've gotten from that neighborhood outreach have made it into the designs that you guys are going to look at today, especially where it comes to where it is when it comes to the landscaping plan. So I think that's all I got. Peter.
Good evening. My name is Peter Quinn. Peter Quinn Architects. That's Quinn. 259 Elm Street, Davis Square, Somerville. Thank you. I have actually been before this board with two other applications similar to this over the years, and so I'm aware of some of the points that I've learned from those, that how important landscaping is for the approval of this, as well as massing of the building and contextual appropriateness for the project. So I do want to address those issues in terms of the design, first starting with the landscape. What we've done is preserve trees along the perimeter of the site, and I'll show you some existing condition photos of those in a minute. We are supplementing them with one additional red maple, and then the rest of the site is lawn and privet hedges and low shrubs of one kind or another, viburnum and others. What we've tried to do with the site plan is to open up a space between the two new buildings, the existing building, which is here, and the new building, which is here, to allow for some outdoor space. This is also a water retention area in the area in the middle, and then the privacy for each of the units around its perimeter. There is one parking space that comes off Vineyard. That's the curb cut that Billy referred to, and then one existing curb cut is reused for the new unit. Billy may have mentioned, I just want to make sure that it's understood that the existing building is a two-family already. So we've converted the two-family to a single and taken that single effectively and put it out in a new building. Dimensionally, we have quite a bit of private open space, and then the common open space that meets the minimum 15-foot by 15-foot requirement. All of the project is dimensionally conforming, according to our analysis. We believe is correct. So we're not asking for any relief other than this particular special permit. So it complies all the way through. Just go through these quickly. Okay, so this is the corner of the existing building showing there before any demolition was done to it. We are taking some of the building away. We actually taking this side off here, a couple of the other features on it, to reorient the building. Oddly enough, the building has two front doors, one on one side and one on the other, and so that's because the building is more or less split down the middle. This is the view from May Street. You can see these nice pine trees. They've been preserved. There are some trees in the middle of the property as well. Some of those had been cut down. And you can see, too, from the contextual map, the assessor's plan, that this footprint that we're proposing, this is the existing condition, is consistent with a number of the small footprints and one and two families that you see throughout the neighborhood. This is a different kind of development. I believe this is Cambridge Housing over here. And then this is a cemetery, the back end of the Cambridge Cemetery there. Looking away from the site, up that would be May Street, and then again is looking down Vineyard. There's been some new construction right next door, where there's a kind of somewhat contemporary building has been put up. This is an aerial view. That's the new contemporary building I just referred to. Here's our corner, and you can see it's quite nice with the trees that are in here, and they just thread their way through the whole neighborhood. So we did want to preserve that as much as possible. This is our view. We've just ghosted in the trees, so you can see the buildings. Obviously, the buildings will be very much more hidden behind these, especially the conifers. But this is the existing building where we've taken off the backside here in order to create a parking spot and to reduce the size of this building so that we can take some of the square footage and put it into the other. These buildings are not that large. They're only about a little bit over 1,600 square feet each, I believe. A new entry, new stairs, a somewhat transitional contemporary look to both the buildings, but yet familiar. I can go through the floor plans if you'd like, but I do want to, these are the elevations. Again, we are able to open up some walkouts in the basement, which don't count toward the FAR, but does enhance the livability of the building tremendously. So this would be the front building, and this is our new building in the rear. Again, a contemporary look to these. Interesting, this is the rear elevation, that's the front elevation. This is what I meant before about the building having two entries, which is kind of interesting quirk. I do want to mention that, just let me find the next slide, that there is a by right scheme that we can do here. Forgive me for turning this, but if this is a Vineyard Street here, this is May. That's the existing building where we've reduced part of it, taken part of it away. If we put a building right here, keeping our minimum 10-foot distance, we would be able to get the same square footage and have a by right project. The reason why we can't attach that is that this building is non-conforming. That's the front setback right there. So it's an existing non-conformity. We leave it alone. But that means we can't attach to it because there's a limit on how much you can add before you get into a variance. So it's another freestanding building. This is 75 feet to there. We can fit it in. We think this is a really unfortunate design if we had to pursue this because it doesn't leave enough open space around the buildings. You can see what we're proposing here allows a lot of breathing room around these buildings. It allows us to use this curb cut and bring it in close to the existing house to minimize the amount of pavement, and both houses benefit from that. So that leads into the criteria for this special permit. This is a development pattern that we do see in the neighborhood. We do believe that by separating these buildings under the special permit that we actually enhance the living environment for each home, providing adequate light and air. We are able to reuse an existing structure, although as Billy said, we already have a building permit for that. But the whole project is premised on being able to do this in a way that is effective and delightful as a design. And then we are able to bring the building into more conformance. We have eliminated a nonconformity on this side and created a parking spot here. This building was previously into the setback too far. There's that. I'm just going through the criteria for the special permit. And there is a grade difference in this site, and I think it's actually as much as 10 feet from the highest point up here to the rear. You can see some of that in this 3D model. So what this gives us is an ability to work with those grades a little more gracefully than bringing the two buildings close together or as one big building, if we were able to do that. And allow each building to sit at its own grade relative to the street, or creating the natural streetscape that you would have with buildings if they had all been built over time. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
One moment, please. Ma'am, please. You'll have an opportunity to speak. Board members have any questions? I do have one question.
Sure.
So the existing house is currently non-conforming.
On two setbacks, front
And two
and one side.
setbacks. And so reducing the size only resolves the
them.
nonconformities to one.
Right.
Now, if you were to demolish the existing house,
Yeah.
I take it you could build a two-family somewhere else on the lot?
Yes, we could go ahead and build a two-family by right all day long, I believe.
And do you know where that would be located?
Well, if we go to this other, this kind of crude diagram that I provided, if this building were cut, you can see. I'll show you where this is approximately the front setback. That's approximately the side setback. This is another front yard setback. So those two are prescribed by the zoning bylaw. The side setbacks are determined by calculation, so I can't say exactly where they are, but they're usually between 7.5 feet and 12 feet, depending on your size of your building. So somewhere in there, there's a rectangle or a couple of rectangles that would fit easily without any relief if we wanted to tear that building down.
And if you were to do that, then I believe you
cut it
said
further.
you'd have a difficulty because of the grade difference?
Well, I think you would end up with a building that just doesn't fit well on the site because of that difference. If you're talking about something that would extend all the way out to here, you're talking about something that would have almost 8 feet of within that length of 8 feet of grade differential. That might be great for whoever's out in the end because they can get a walkout. But if you were to have another unit over here, say on the front there, they would be isolated in the volume. Yeah. Okay. So I think, balancing it all, it seemed to make the most sense to separate them, get this down at its own grade, and then maintain this one. And the existing building is not something you would automatically say tear it down. I mean, we felt like this is reusable, and we wanted to proceed on that basis.
Okay, fine. So we'll go to public comment. I don't know, Swathi, is there a sign-up sheet at all?
I believe nobody's signed up on the sheet, so go ahead.
Okay. Is there in? Okay, fine. So when you come forward, please come forward and state your name and address for the stenographer. And we ask that you speak only for 3 minutes. There is a lighting system. After you said your name, the green light will go on. When you're near the end of your 3 minutes, a yellow light will go on, and when it turns red, we ask that you wrap up. So you wish to speak, ma'am? Fine. Please.
I'd like to look at A1 if we could. Is there some way to put that on there?
Please state your name.
Of course. Robert Lamoth, Lamothe, and my wife and I own the house at 9-11 May Street. And could I use the pointer for a second? We live directly right next to where the new house is going to be put. And if you look at the map over here, right here, there's a nice large space in between the existing house and our house. So with the new house, it's going to be right there where I'm pointing, and it's a very close distance to our house, very short. One of my questions is, how many feet is it from the new house to our house? And the bottom line for us is it's too close from just looking at the pictures. It's too close to our house. And why would you want to stick another house, cram another house in a beautiful space like that? What is the reason why they're wanting to do that? And how is that going to benefit people in the neighborhood? The other thing is I take exception to the statement that says in here, the neighbors generally expressed approval and enthusiasm for the development. I'd say that's not accurate because we're the immediate neighbors. I mean, maybe some of the other neighbors were, but we didn't express that enthusiasm. And I just think that it's too close. The bottom line is it's too close. And I'd like to find out why they're putting it there, why they want to take away that beautiful space and cram another house in there.
Okay.
Charles Solomon, and I'm an owner of the house probably that will be most impacted by the development. And it is an already overcrowded neighborhood, I will say. And although the plan looks lovely for the two houses that are being proposed to be built there, I think the space around, my house is being impacted in a way that is not so lovely. And I frankly, of course, I was very lucky to be able to, from our bedrooms, which is very close to the property line there, have beautiful green garden space that's been there for, forever. It was just happens to be a beautifully landscaped spot by somebody. It was an old family neighborhood, and it was lovely to have that. And I just feel I have nothing to gain, only everything to lose. So I would like at least enough respect for my property as the two proposed constructed houses. I think it would be nice to I just want to be sure that I have as much beauty around my house and quietness, especially with people coming and going. It's been very quiet there, so I don't want to be vulnerable, especially since I haven't, I think I met somebody once and I said I wasn't thrilled about it. Nobody would be in my case. So I just want to make my feelings. Mine is a family house. It's been there forever as well. So for me, it's impacting, what we've had. So I just wanted to state that and hope that they'll come to some logical or compassionate sense about the space around my house. It seems feeling invaded. It's just funny.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Yes, ma'am. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
I am sorry I'm late. Marilee Meyer, 10 Dana Street. And I apologize if I'm behind on what was said prior to, but I went to look at this site just out of curiosity, and it's really a very tight community or a network of streets, and in looking at the design of the project, I am really tired of generic-looking buildings that do not have a sense of order in the windows, the fenestrations, the angle of the roof, the generic materials. There's got to be some way to have a better statement or individual character instead of cookie cutter kind of cheap buildings that take shortcuts. And I've never been to this area before, and I found it totally charming, small scale. The streets are incredibly narrow. If this was at a historical commission, I would sit there and wax poetic about how he could do better. But those are my statements hot off the sidewalk. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? All right, none appearing. Then board members. Jeff, I have a question. My understanding is the Historical Commission took no position with regard to this building.
That is my understanding, is that the Historical Commission did not review or take a position, as you said, on the alterations to the existing structure. And maybe the applicant can explain the interaction he's had with the Historical Commission?
Could you please speak to the microphone?
With respect to the Historical Commission, we didn't have any public hearing with the full commission. We did speak administratively with Charlie Sullivan, numerous times about our alterations to the roof line, which is one of the things they care about quite a bit, and also the preservation of entryways and how the house would sit. They, interestingly enough, the Historic Commission likes the nonconformance on May Street because that's very typical of houses in that street from that time period. So there's always a preference to maintain things like that from historic. So there was a lot of dialogue with them about that house, which did receive their approval, and that's why we have a permit for that house.
Okay, thank you.
Point of information?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe I believe in the report that was submitted, they did question the window pattern on the modern buildings. They didn't particularly care for them, but they.
That's the CDD memo. Yes, we're aware of that memo, and our representatives are here. I'm sorry, sir. You've already had your opportunity to speak. We don't take questions from the board.
I haven't had my 2 questions answered. I'd like them answered that I asked.
Well, we may get to that. So please. All right, board members, questions, comments? Hugh?
So, I was a member of this board when the zoning provision that requires a special permit was put in place. And frankly, I don't remember ever discussing corner lots, so I was surprised when this building triggered the review. It was based actually on the next, street and a half over, Howorthy Street, where the distance between Howorthy and Cushing is larger than usual, so the lots are deep, and people were building houses in backyards, and so this was written to talk about that, or to require us to look at that question. So in a sense, the intent of the zoning has nothing, or this proposal really has nothing to do with the intent of the zoning, except to the extent that the intent is to have the non-built open space sort of massed together so you get more effect out of the open space. Now, I'd also remind you that this board has given several permits to build houses in the rear on Howorthy Street. Each time the cases come up, the consensus of abutters, proponents on this board was that building the separate structures was preferable to building one larger structure. So I also I've not been in this neighborhood very much in my life, so that was almost like I'd never been there before, although I must have been there for one or more of the Howorthy cases. And I find the interesting part about this neighborhood is that it's very tight scale. The houses are very close to each other. They're of quite different architectural styles, although none of them really has much style. There were expressions of what was commonly being built at the time they were built. If I had been the architect for this project and not knowing what my client would have wished, I would have probably wanted to do something that was a little less 21st century. But I think it's, the buildings are small. The openings are, reasonable openings that are found around. The pattern is very different. The roof line bugs me a great deal, but I can see how and why it was done. And I think, this neighborhood is architecturally strong enough that these buildings will end up contributing rather than detracting, even though they're, built in a different era and look like it.
Excuse me. My initial reaction is that the buildings are exceedingly plain, which I guess is part of the modern character. But I would like to see a little bit more that reflects the neighborhood. Now, I guess there is a new modern building going down the street, so perhaps that is what the new neighborhood is going to be like. But I would just, like you to think a little bit more about that window pattern and maybe it's in the materials and that sort of thing that we could reflect a little bit more of what is in the neighborhood. I don't have a problem with the two buildings. I think that makes more sense than doing the one big one. Did you want to say something about the?
No,
No? Okay.
I think that's. I'm happy to consider
so I don't
more
have
detail.
Any,
yeah,
I don't have any
absolutely.
suggestions as to what those would be, but
I'm sure we could, and it would also correspond to what one member, Marilyn, had said as well, is some adjustments to the windows and the window detail.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. Yeah, that'd
to
be
make
fine.
it look a little more traditional, maybe.
Yeah.
I think the what is the actual setback then between the property now and the abutters, that of the abutters who spoke?
So right here, so their house, I'm not sure who actually owns the house, but they're built almost right on the property line.
Okay.
So we have 12 and a half feet here.
12 and a half. Okay. And then it's kind of close.
So,
and what was the distance again between the two buildings?
These two right here is scaling, it's probably about 25 feet.
Okay.
So
okay, and the parking is on either side. So is there, I mean, I realize there's a grade change and everything, but is there any possibility of moving that that one house a little bit closer to the existing one?
Yes, please. Who's going to speak, Mr. Quinn or Mr. Sene, is it?
Sene, yeah. First, I just want to point out that against this house are now two parking spaces, which are right up against it, and they serve the two family that's here. So you basically walk through here to get to your house.
Okay.
So we're taking away one of those spots.
Yep.
This may be obvious, but we're putting a landscape buffer in there and just leaving one spot now. So from that point of view, there's an improvement. We're also not parking in the front setback, which the current plan does now. So currently,
And there is an elevation change, as you were saying,
Yeah,
which is what causes it to be difficult. Okay. And let me think, was there something else?
I mean, I think as to the question of whether we could move this, we certainly can't move the parking space because that is sort of cast in with the existing curb cut that we don't
Yeah,
want to
no,
change.
I don't have a problem
And
with the
some
parking
trees.
space. I'm just thinking if you could give the abutters just a little bit more space and less so to the new owners. I mean, the new owners are going to be buying into
whatever's there.
whatever is
Yeah,
there, and
exactly.
these folks have been living
Yeah.
with
certainly
you know,
something we
it's a
could
very
look
nice-
at. I mean, I
Yeah,
think it complicates
that's
things a
all I
little
would
bit.
ask, if
Yeah.
there's a way of giving them a little bit more without
Right, understood.
making the project infeasible. But otherwise, I think it's and will be a nice addition to the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Corinne?
So, because we're only considering whether the question before us is whether to grant a special permit for it to be more than 75 feet from the Vineyard Street line. So, if you moved the house, would that put you within? If you moved the house back further away from the abutters, would that resolve the need for a special permit?
We'd have to move it quite a
Both.
bit, and it would effectively destroy all of the outdoor space between the two buildings.
Okay.
So,
Another.
the yellow diagram that I showed if you want, I can bring it up again if you'd like.
No, thank you. My other question is just how the grade difference impacts enjoyment of the newer property, the second property. I'm imagining, torrential rainstorms like we had yesterday and all the water
Right.
going down. So I saw that little water retention
Correct.
bucket.
That's exactly there for that reason. too.
So does that drain to groundwater, or where does that water go?
No, that's a natural recharge. And,
Okay.
Yeah, to groundwater, exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's this area here, that's a contour indicating a deflection into the ground, or depression into the ground, yeah, right there. So all the water around the site is, from uphill side is directed to that. And then the rest can be handled through natural recharge, yeah.
Nico, nothing? Steve? Don't have to speak.
With all the large commercial projects that this board deals with, there's frequently nothing more difficult than dealing with a small residential unit in dense residential neighborhoods. I agree that the design of the houses themselves are exceedingly simple. That's not totally inconsistent with the neighborhood, but I think that you could do a little bit more and make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more attention to the details. The more problematic one for me, of course, is the location of the house. If you just look at the lot alone, this seems like a very reasonable way of laying out the two houses. When you look at the neighbor, the impact on the neighbor is very substantial. Now, of course, the neighbor is right on the lot line and is non-conforming, and from many perspectives, what you're doing is perfectly reasonable. On the other hand, if there's some way of accommodating your goals on the lot that would have less impact on the neighbor, well, that would be a nice outcome also. Frankly, moving it over a foot or so isn't going to make that much difference. I look at it and I say, this might be an instance where it would actually be better to connect the two houses. I understand there's another zoning impact, but it's one that would be easy to overcome, I think, under the circumstances. But that would pull the structures significantly away from the adjoining structure. There'd be more open space, and it's difficult to find just the right compromise and resolution in these instances. In this instance, I think that would be a better compromise and resolution, reducing significantly the impact on the neighbor.
May I speak to that point?
Yes.
That actually would require a variance, which, obviously is quite a high standard. In my opinion, the zoning bylaw is actually set up that way in order to encourage smaller buildings in the neighborhoods and to encourage this kind of development. This simply, and of course most buildings are non-conforming, so it puts us in that position.
If I could just comment on that, ordinarily I would totally agree that if you could have two freestanding structures rather than one larger connected structure, that would be preferable. But of course, every lot is unique. And in this instance, I personally feel that the best compromise of the various interests, it would in fact be to connect it. It's true you'd need a variance, but you would. No guarantees in life, but I think under these unique circumstances, and once it's explained what the rationale was for that variance, I think you'd get the variance, and obviously you'd get the support of your neighbor, which doesn't frequently happen in variance hearings. So, no imperfect solutions in this world, and these issues are tough, but I think that would be a better compromise of the various interests between the owner of your property and the owner of the neighboring property.
Lou?
I actually think it's a good use of the property. I think the layout is nice. I do agree with everyone else. You do need a little more detail in these buildings. Okay. And I'd also caution about moving this building closer to that recharge pit. That might create some headaches for you and your foundations.
There is a limit. Excuse me. Yeah.
That's the other problem. Other than that, maybe you can do something enhancing the landscaping along that side of the lot to help. Then it turns into a fence. You're in a tough spot. But all in all, I think it's a good project.
Thank you.
Okay. I too think that the two-building solution is the preferable one. It seems to be appropriate to the rest of the neighborhood, which is a lot of small houses very close together to each other. I realize the abutter has had the benefit for probably many, many years of a very large open space, an anomalous open space in the neighborhood, I think, that it is right on the street. Most of the large open spaces that exist are in the rear of the houses, but they have had the benefit of that. We had a similar hearing down the block involving a removal of a large tree, and two houses have been built there, and they're quite lovely. I mean, they really are exceptionally well done and fit very well into the neighborhood. I think architecturally they're much more interesting than these houses, and so I too throw my opinion in with it. It needs some more thought about the actual design of the buildings and something a little bit more interesting. But just to be clear, if you tore down the existing house, and I know you don't want to do that, but if you were to tear down the existing house, you could construct one single large two-family house in full compliance with zoning somewhere on the lot, although that creates lots of issues with regard to the topography of the lot. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have a lot that has enough frontage, enough area. You need 5,000 square feet in a Res B district. Yes. We, in theory, could build a single larger building or two separate buildings, and along the lines of the yellow diagram I showed you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Hugh?
So if you were to move the May Street building, the question would be, how far would you move it? And so right now, the minimum setback in the zoning district, which doesn't apply to very many of the buildings, but nevertheless is what the law says, is 7.5 feet. So that would permit buildings to be 15 feet apart. So it seems to me it would be very awkward for us to say, well, you've got to have even more than 15. But if you're going to pick a number, I'd say, okay, 15 feet from where the house is next door. That gets you into a condition that is what the zoning would have told you could expect to have. And that wouldn't be an enormous change, but it would be a little better.
So that would be 15 feet between
between the structures. If the butters is right on the property line, then it would be 15 feet on the lots.
I think we're, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
right here, instead of 12 and a half, that would become 15. I
Right.
believe that's what's being suggested.
Well, what
The
is the...
drawing actually says 13 and a half.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. On Z1, it may,
Yeah. It is 13 and a half.
Yeah.
You're correct.
So if the distance between the two houses as proposed now is,
I'm sorry, I don't have that number on there.
I'm trying, well, that's 7.5, and that's, I'm sorry, I can't quite
Yeah, that's,
calculate it.
It's about 28 feet right now between the buildings.
So are you, Hugh, are you suggesting reducing that space to 15?
no, I'm suggesting that the space between them and the abutting house be 15 feet.
Be 15 rather than 12.5,
Because I think the virtue of this design
or
is that
13.5.
it allows the two new buildings to have an adequate open space that is shared, at least visually. And to the extent that the point of this ordinance is to try to get rational open spaces,
Right.
that would accomplish that.
And we want to retain rational open space between these two structures.
Right,
As well.
because they're effectively backyards. The way the land is designed, and
But I mean, there's very little open space behind them, and so it's mostly the frontage on May Street and the land between the two structures.
right. I mean the frontage on May Street is, I guess, 7 feet bigger than the original, and the result is 5 handsome trees have had enough space to grow and flourish, or 2 of them at least, the ones that are opposite the existing building. So
Would moving the second structure 1.5 foot, say, impact on, there are no trees in the middle there currently, is that correct?
Correct. That's intended to be, open landscaping.
Right, so there are no trees that it would impact on.
Right. I mean, I believe, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I believe that would be viable for us. I was just checking here on the screen. We have these requirements for permeable open space and common open space. So if we had 15 feet here, this would increase the amount of this so-called 15 by 15 area, which is a good thing. And we would reduce this amount between these two buildings just slightly. So if the owners are okay with that, I think that's something that we could offer as a way to be consistent with what would result from a normal compliant pattern of setbacks. Increasing this and landscaping it maybe a little more intensively too, for the benefit of the neighbors as well. Taking that, and I should correct for the record, it's 13 and a half. Yeah, and a half, not 12 and a half. Yeah, 15, correct. We're getting there.
Prepared to go forward?
One question, and we haven't heard any motion yet, do we? But if perchance the motion does suggest any improvement on the actually facades or design of the house, how would that be enforced.
The staff apparently wrote a report that identified this as something that we witnessed. First by saying you got
Oh. The enforcer.
Since Eric is here, Eric, do you wish to add any comments to the discussion? Yes.
I'm Eric Thorkildsen, that's Thorkildsen in the CDD. Really don't have a lot to add to what you said, and Susanna actually reviewed the project, and her memo alluded to potential fine-tuning tune-ups to the elevations and materials. So I think what you're suggesting is a reasonable way to proceed.
So if we were to proceed, pardon me? I'm sorry. Is the board willing to listen to one additional comment from the abutters? Yes, please come forward.
It's just another perspective.
Please.
Sorry. Yes. It's just another way of looking at it. If I'm feeling cramped by a house, which I can't move mine, obviously, someone who's going to pay an exorbitant amount of money for that house is also going to consider, the proximity to a house right next to it. So that might allow you to rethink about it and, just accommodate both the new owners and myself. Nobody's wants to be that crushed in. So I just wanted to say, if you look at it that way.
Right. I think at this point we're more concerned about you, you being the abutter, rather than some hypothetical purchaser who can come along and make their own decision whether, it's worth it to them or not. Mr. Senate, you wish surely.
Just because they were brought up, I thought I should clarify. The idea of it was brought up a few times. The idea of moving the building or demolishing and rebuilding. In our many meetings with Cambridge Historic, it was made very clear to us that this building would be found preferably preserved and possibly significant. So the idea of a demolition or a large variance would be in opposition to that idea. And then the second thing is the spacing here with the 13.5.
Just staying on your first point, but they did have no problem with you removing a large portion of the house.
It is a smaller portion, and they're fine because we were maintaining the characteristics of the home, the framed roof and rough portions to the street. That they liked that, but a demolition is a totally different story as far as historic goes. And then the second piece was this site plan and this landscaping plan has been iterated many times, and it's I should say that the 13.5 feet that we do find that second house from the side lot line, while it doesn't seem like a lot, when it's built, it feels like a lot, and we've put that at that 13.5 foot depth, knowing that it's more gracious than we normally would need to under the zoning, and knowing also that on the other side of that house, that other side of that volume, is a steep elevation change, and it's a little bit difficult to think about just looking at a top-down map. But if you imagine the effect of moving a house 1.5 feet or 2 feet or 3 feet further towards a big change, you end up cramping there, and And as far as I could read in reading Res B and reading this specific piece about the 75-foot special permit, the intention is to maintain larger open spaces wherever possible. So pushing it that direction, you actually kind of go against what you were supposed to do in the first place. So I think that we've actually done a pretty darn good job with that 13.5 feet. That's my peep.
Okay. So if we were to grant a special permit under section 5.532, there are two different findings we could make. One is that development in the form of two or more structures on the lot will not significantly increase or may reduce the impact of the new construction should it occur in a single structure. The other alternative is that the two or more structures may provide identifiable benefits beyond that, provided should all construction be in a single structure. In making its findings, the board shall consider the impact of the new construction on the following. 1, the extent to which the preservation of large contiguous open space in the rear or series of adjacent lots is achieved. 2, incentives for the location of buildings and parking facilities in the front half of the lot in a pattern compatible with the development pattern in the neighborhood. 3, the extent to which two or more structures provides an enhanced living environment for residents on the lot. 4, incentives to retain existing structures on a lot, particularly any structure determined to be preferably preserved by the Historic Commission. 5, opportunities presented to reduce the visual impact of parking from the public streets and from adjacent lots. And 6, the increased opportunities to reduce the height and bulk as new construction is deeper into a lot or closer to structures on abutting lots. So if we were to make the first finding, then we don't have to go any further. If we cannot determine we cannot make that finding, then we would have to go through the 6 individual elements or 6 individual considerations. So can we say that the development in the form of two or more structures on the lot will not significantly increase or may reduce the impact of new construction should it occur in a single structure?
I would say, given the testimony of the abutter, it would be hard to make that finding.
Okay. So that, as far as the abutter goes, one single structure would be preferable.
I think so.
Okay. So then, let us go to...
Or a single structure would have less impact on them in the terms of the finding.
On them than the two.
Even if there was a demolition permit for the original structure?
I mean, it's going to be, if you build a single structure, but if you build a single structure, then some of the things that you're in the list below can't be done. So,
right.
And some of them are specifically related to the premise of the ordinance that you have a deep lot rather than a wide lot that you're discussing. So it seems to me the second list, if you discount the ones which obviously don't apply, you've achieved all the other ones.
Well, then why don't we work our way through the second list? So the extent to which the preservation of a large contiguous open space in the rear of the lot or series of adjacent lots is achieved through the provision of a rear yard setback significantly greater than that required, and through the dedication of that rear yard as green areas defined in this ordinance.
So that's basically not applicable.
Not applicable
to this particular lot.
Right. So incentives for the location of buildings and parking facilities in the front half of a lot in a pattern compatible with the development pattern prevailing in the neighborhood.
Again, it's not really applicable.
It's not real applicable, but the parking, the proposed parking is very much in keeping with the parking
Yes.
pattern in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
which almost all has parking on the side,
Mhm.
except for the abutting new modern house, which has an enormous paved parking
Right.
in the front. The extent to which two or more structures provides an enhanced living environment for residents on the lot.
It's the open space.
It's the open space between them rather than having one structure and a two-family house. Incentives to retain existing structures on a lot, particularly any structure determined to be a preferably preserved structure, significant structure by the Cambridge Historical Commission. Well, we haven't gotten anything officially from the Historic Commission other than that they have not taken a position on it. There has been testimony that while they did agree to the removal of a portion of one, they did not, that they presumably would have a different position with regard to a demolition of the building. But this does retain most of the existing building.
Yeah.
Opportunities presented to reduce the visual impact of parking from the public street and from adjacent lots. Well, parking on one side has been historic and is actually going to reduce the parking from two to one. And on the other side, the city council has granted a curb cut for the parking. So they've already...
And the abutting land use is parking.
And the abutting land use is parking, right. The increased opportunities to reduce the height and bulk as new construction is deeper into a lot or closer to structures on abutting lots. Presumably, it is closer to a structure on a abutting lot, that one abutter, than had it been, say, centered in the lot. But presumably a two-family in the center of the lot would be, I imagine, would be a larger, taller structure than either of these two buildings.
So this last one is a benefit that's not achieved by this plan, I think we would say.
I'm sorry?
So this is a checklist of benefits that might be achieved.
Right.
And the last one is not being achieved by this plan, but on balance, we're told to consider and not to require.
Right. Well, wouldn't you say, though, that if there were one larger structure, it would be taller and bulkier than...
Yeah, right. Be twice
as
the
big.
bulk.
Yes.
The deeper into the lot is not applicable, and closer to structures on abutting lots, you could actually pull it away. So it's like, taken as a whole, you can't find that this goal is, this plan doesn't achieve that goal, nor does it think any plan could achieve this particular goal on this lot.
Right. So having reviewed all those considerations, do we feel comfortable saying that the two structures provide identifiable benefits beyond that provided should all construction be in a single structure?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. If we were to grant this, make a motion to grant this, are there conditions we feel should be imposed upon this? And I think the two that have been discussed, there's always ongoing review and consultation with CDC, but I mean, is there somewhat stronger language we might use or feel appropriate to use in this instance, that particularly with regard to the, I don't know, the windows and the overall design? I don't really know how to phrase it other than...
Well, our expectation would be there'd be a somewhat more regular plan of the fenestration on the portions of the building facing the public streets, because I don't think we particularly care about the other sides. And that we would like to see more architectural articulation.
Articulation.
Right.
Good.
And without sort of taking some of the ideas and doing them a little more.
And then the other matter that I heard discussed was the possibility of moving the second structure a foot and a half from 13.5 feet from the sideline to 15 feet. Is that something we feel is mandatory?
I don't, even though I offered the 15-foot compromise myself, but...
Just that it be reviewed again with CDD as to its feasibility, or we don't feel it's necessary? Well, I don't know what impact, as Mr. Sene said, I don't know what impact it has on other issues.
Wait, but given that they've offered it as a compromise, why would it not be mandatory?
Well, I think the architect suggested he could offer it, but I'm not sure that the owner was willing to offer it.
Well, that might turn on how
representation of the owner.
we feel
Right.
about it and what we express. And
Given that representation, I feel totally comfortable making it a mandatory requirement.
I agree.
Mr. Quinn?
If I may speak on that point, as long as it doesn't create any new nonconformities, I think that would be important to us. In other words, something that we would not be able to cure in the ways of open space, minimum, open space. And I don't think it will, but I just want that one caveat in there.
To the extent that it's feasible under the zoning ordinance and building code, would that make sense? That it be required to be moved to 15 feet from the side lot line?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else we feel is appropriate to add as a condition to this? And then we're all familiar with the requirements under 10.23. Rather than running through them all again, is any of those issues, any of those matters of concern to any board member that we need to address? Okay, 10.43, I'm sorry. So then, could I have a motion to grant a special permit to allow for the construction of two structures, one being more than 75 feet from the lot line, with regard to this project, subject, in accordance with the findings we've just made under 5.53, and conditioned upon particular review and revision of the fenestration facing the public ways and the architectural articulation of the facades, and subject to the second structure, new structure, being moved to 15 feet from the side lot line, provided it is feasible in accordance with the zoning ordinance and the building code. Is there a second? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Okay. The side lot line away at the far end of Vineyard Street. Pardon me? Adjacent to 911 Vineyard. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry? Jeff, do they need to set up for the next hearing?
The same architect.
Oh, Peter?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Well, why don't we just take a 5-minute break here to reorganize?
This next one is a fascinating case.
I haven't. I heard you. It's beautiful. What do you think was the key that made it work?
This one is.
The architecture is just very nice. They're very handsome buildings. I mean, I'm not wild about them being great.
So I was interested to read today that the mayor of New York City is going to propose outlawing glass curtain wall buildings in New York because of their environmental deficiencies. Yeah. It's in the getting authorization from the state legislature to do it. That's the stage it's in. I have a problem with that because in terms of equity and fairness,
Yeah, pretty much tonight. Brought my sleeping bag.
for rich people, it's not a big deal. Right. Right, or maybe working, cleaning shifts when public transit isn't available, or stuff like that.
Parking space, yeah.
Might not, yeah.
Taxes, whatever laws apply in the year that we're talking about, like that's it, or whatever. But if I think about
Are there places where, depending on the last number of your license plate, you can't? Yeah.
So, like, what is your perspective on?
Mm-hmm.
Retroactive application of it?
Because when they got the permit, that was the rule. But in my mind, I was first like, what that was agreed to. But
Yeah. I don't know, it's usually discretionary. I think lots of laws are retroactive or not. Criminal laws, they have different rules.
Right.
Because of fairness.
I've never seen
With something like this, I don't think there's any moral principle one way or another that sort of cuts in every case.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it helps in that it's not.
But it's pretty common.
Right.
it's a big dollar.
if you're rich, you just have to have 2 cars with different plates.
Okay, we're now having a public hearing on a request to amend the special permit granted in Planning Board case number 296 by Crimson Galleria LP for the property located at 57 JFK Street. The amendment seeks, pursuant to Article 2 definition of gross floor area, to exempt the existing basement level from GFA and to delete the required contribution to the Harvard Square Improvement Fund based on the total GFA being less than 80% of the maximum permitted on the lot, which was a condition imposed in the special permit granted pursuant to section 20.54.4, which authorizes to waive parking and loading requirements in the Harvard Square Overlay District. And one of the conditions is that if this payment needs to be made if there's development of more than 80% of the gross floor area on the lot. The proponent? Excuse me.
Good evening. I'm Charles LeRay, L-E space capital R-A-Y, 745 Atlantic Avenue. I represent the applicant. I'm going to give just a brief introduction to discuss the zoning relief we're looking for, and then I'll turn it over to Peter Quinn, the architect, to discuss the design. This project is the vertical expansion of the Cambridge Galleria, 57 JFK Street. It was approved in 2015, and as was noted, we're looking to amend the zoning relief for it. It's a 3-story vertical expansion, a 3rd floor that covers much of the building footprint, step back from Winthrop Street, a 4th floor that covers about half the building footprint, and then a smaller mezzanine which covers less than half of the 4th floor's footprint. In 2015, this board granted a special permit under 20.54.4 to waive the parking requirement. That section allows 2 types of waiver in the Harvard Square Overlay District. You can waive either because gross floor area is kept below 80% of what would otherwise be allowed, or you can waive because there's a payment to be made equal to half of the cost of constructing the spaces that would not be provided. And it was under the latter that zoning relief was granted in 2015. It then went through the post-planning board community development design process of finalizing the design, working out details. Recently, CDD established the new cost for the waived parking spaces. Historically, it had been on the order of $10,000 to $12,000 a space. They determined that a space is $96,500, so the waiver price was $48,250 per space. Also, previously, one made that payment when they got their certificate of occupancy, and CDD decided that would now be made when you get the building permit. So, roughly a 4 times increase in the amount of the payment, and it's being made roughly 18 months earlier than it would historically have been made. Meanwhile, the City Council amended the zoning in 2016 to authorize this board to grant special permits waiving basements from inclusion in gross floor area if the use of the basement would support the character of the neighborhood and the district that it's in. And so we're back on that basis seeking a special permit to waive the inclusion of the basement gross floor area. With that special permit waiver, the building, including the expansion, would come to about 77% of what's allowed. And so on the basis that we're below 80, we're asking that the parking relief be granted on that basis rather than on the payment basis. And to clarify one thing that was addressed in the staff memo, in 2015, the project size the lot size was 17,000 and change. At the time, it included 96 Winthrop because the originally proposed project was significantly larger than what was ultimately approved in 2015. And to make the numbers work for the original not approved project, we needed the lot area of 96 Winthrop. Once the addition got reduced to what's currently proposed with greater setbacks from Winthrop Street, JFK, and the alley, the project that was ultimately approved in 2015, which is what we're here asking to modify the zoning relief on, no longer needs the lot area of 96 Winthrop to make the numbers work. So 96 Winthrop is no longer part of the project, and that's why the lot area is described in the current materials as 14,504 square feet. And with that, I'll turn it over to Peter Quinn to talk about the design.
Oh, that's you. Yeah.
I'm sorry? No, well, we'll have Peter talk to that, but my understanding is no, nothing has been changed with regard to the structure or the... I'm sorry, what is the question?
So I'm wondering what... I don't want Peter to go up and explain the whole bill. to show us the basement and how the basement area, what it's used for, et cetera, so we can address the question before us.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
However, I think for the benefit of some of the board members who may not have been on the board at the time, and for the public, a very brief explanation.
Under an hour? Yeah.
Yes, let's say under 5 minutes, of the building as permitted.
For the record, my name is Peter Quinn of Peter Quinn Architects in 259 Elm Street, Davis Square, Somerville. Good evening. Yes, we did go through a very, very lengthy permitting process, both with, I think we had 2 hearings here and innumerable hearings before the Historic Commission before we resolved a design that was suitable for this property and what the program was. I think these are just floor plans. I'll come back to those in a minute and go to another slide set that I have. This is our original application as we presented here in 2016. So as you can see, this is the same set here. Okay, so this is the street view that you see both in terms of a streetscape. Going to this is the JFK elevation, John F. Kennedy Street. That's the garage where it has a tower just at this location. That's the JFK garage. And then here you can see the entire street all the way up past Mount Auburn in terms of, and this is Winthrop Park right here, Winthrop Square, and how this building steps back in relationship to that with the addition. So everything above this line approximately is new. And from the, of course, this is all flattened out, so you see, I'll show you some 3D perspectives in a minute. But this is the view from Winthrop Park, Winthrop Square, showing the addition as it steps back. Again, this is a view cut through JFK Street, down Winthrop. This is the 96 that was referred to. This is the red something restaurant. Red House. Thank you. Forgot. And you can see from the corner, this corner of Mount Auburn Street, how this building steps back. It has a lovely edge of greenery facing the park. Then there's a step back, another step back, and then finally a third step back to the mezzanine level. This is the view now over here. This is a view from the park. Of course, there are a lot of trees. This is a winter view, same view we just saw. And you can see this various steps back. You can barely see the mezzanine level, just a little bump up there. Further back, going up past Mount Auburn, a similar view. Looking up JFK from down below, the garage on the left, and then a big window here, kind of at the same scale as the garage, and then it steps down as we head toward Winthrop. Again, a view up Winthrop Street, looking toward, I think it's Winthrop Tower. And you have here, this is where Shake Shack is presently, and you can see virtually none of the new building from this particular vantage point. There are a few other locations here where you can see a little bit popping up. This is a view. We created a new entry in the passageway that is, or the alley that is between the existing Galleria building and 96 Winthrop. This has an elevator for our new offices that occupy these upper levels, new entry, lobby, so forth. In the back here are areas for utility, somewhat more hidden than they are now, but serviced by this passageway between the two. This is a view from above for the park. You can see we have planned on decks, more decks, landscaping along the edge, and these Systems are primarily suppressed below the level of the decks at the old roof level, so we build above that. I'm happy to explain that in more detail if you'd like. But that gives you a good 3D view of what we're trying to do. At this point, we have no design changes. We are simply here on the matter relating to the garage, relating to the parking and to the basement use. These are some of our materials, very high quality fiber cement panels that are stone-like, metal panels, glazing, interior shades, planters. All right, so I'm actually going to go to the other set because this has more. This is an older set of tenants, but it will give you an idea. This other set will give you an idea of who we have in the building now. So, interestingly, in the time that we've been working on this project, over half of the building is turned over as to tenants. Staples is still there. This is just for orientation. This is Winthrop here. This is JFK. There's a restaurant down there. There's a Korean restaurant that's been there for about 5 years, 6 years. On the this used to be Wagamama. This is now divided into a couple tenants. Again, food service. Shake Shack is here. Yogurtland is now Tom Bao Bao. Dumplings, all consistent with the similar uses. In the basement, as Staples, certainly a very important service provided through this retail for the square, both for students and for office workers. For the time being, they remain. This, if you've ever been down to that Korean restaurant, you know there's a line out the door most of the time. Again, very, very consistent with the neighborhood. And as we go through the building, we see more of that. Staples, Shake Shack, food services of one kind or another. The famous Indian restaurant, and then these have turned over to new tenants. I think one of them is a Power Yoga, and a few other food services moving in. I think there may be some empty space as well. So that use will continue. It's consistent. We don't really anticipate any change in that. That kind of mix, which makes the building vibrant. We still have maintained the big open space in the middle, although it wouldn't have the skylight that it has now. I think that's actually already been closed over under some work that's been done in prep for this addition. On our third floor, big open space, and decks out front with the HVAC equipment. We're still working on that design. Fourth floor steps back farther. And then finally, the mezzanine is actually kind of a small private office serviced by its own lift-type elevator. That's a roof plan. You can see them all 2D. So with that, I'll happy to take any questions about the tenants or how you see the basement being used and any issues with that.
So has a building permit been issued under the 2015 special permit?
So we did do some prep work because a number of tenants had moved out, Wagamama and others, and so there's quite a bit of structural work that is hidden in the walls and some fireproofing that had to be done. So we had an opportunity to do that. We developed a phase 1 for that work, and that was completed recently.
Okay. Has the payment to the city been made under the 2015 special permit?
So that work, since it was all inside, did not necessarily trigger, I believe it did not trigger the conditions of the special permit. We could have done it on our own, even without the special permit, because it was entirely interior in the building.
So the payment has not yet been made?
Has not.
And the building permit hasn't been issued?
That's right. The work that was done on the existing building did not depend on the special permit. It facilitates the later work. So the building permit for the vertical expansion has not yet been issued and won't be issued unless the payment is made before the building permit.
Okay.
I would just add to that that we do have an application in front of Inspectional Services and have had that there for quite a while, like many, many months, possibly a year, waiting to resolve this issue. 16 months for the record.
This issue has been what's been holding it up for 6.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. More than any other single issue. Yeah.
The process of
Could you please speak in the microphone? And could I remind everyone to please speak right into the microphones?
The process of community development deciding what the pricing would be took the better part of a year. And so during that whole time, the plans were at ISD but couldn't make any progress.
Thank
Can I
you.
ask another question? Sorry. Is there any precedent for an amended special permit resulting in sort of a refund of a payment that a prior special permit had required?
I'm not aware of an amendment resulting in a refund, and this also would not result in a refund.
Sorry, I mean refund in a general sense, not a legal sense.
No payment has been made. There's certainly been many special permits in Cambridge that have been amended. I know of one that's been amended 5 or 6 times as new buildings came along or new things happened over time. So I don't know if there's one that exactly matches this scenario, but certainly amending special permits and changing the zoning relief has strong precedent.
All right, let me be more specific. Has the planning board ever amended a prior special permit that required a payment to eliminate the payment?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
Okay, one more question. Are you aware of whether this planning board has the statutory authority to do that?
I am absolutely certain the planning board has the authority to do that. You have the authority to grant any relief that you're empowered under the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance says very clearly you can waive required parking in the Harvard Square Overlay District by choosing one of 2 methods depending on what the applicant qualifies for. And you granted relief in 2015 under one path. We're asking that you go down the other path. But I don't have any question about your statutory authority to do that.
So under Cambridge's ordinances, the planning board does not have the statutory authority to make appropriations or to incur any liability on behalf of the city. And so I'm curious as to whether a special permit required payment constitutes a something of value that the city currently has, and thus waiving that required payment in the previous special permit would incur a liability.
I don't see how it could. I'll confess I'm not an expert in municipal law, but the zoning requires that the payment goes to the Harvard Square Endowment Fund, that their first use of it is supposed to be to provide parking in Harvard Square, which everyone, I think, says we don't need more of right now. And if there's no parking project, then to do other things with it. But they can't spend the money until they have it. There should be no way that they've been spending money in anticipation of receiving this, because this board's granting of a special permit does not mean the project has to be built. The applicant is free at any time to change his or her mind and say, the economy changed, my mind changed, I'm not going to build that. And certainly there are special permits and variances that have been granted and never acted upon. And so if the applicant were to decide not to proceed with this project at all, then there would be no obligation to make a payment. And I can't imagine that anyone has spent that money in anticipation that it would be paid later.
That's convincing.
I think this is a case of first impression with regard to the payment and the waiver, because this provision, the exemption to GFA, was adopted 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And so one possibility would be to ask the city solicitor whether indeed the planning board does have the power to do that, although I had not thought about it, but as was suggested, the proponent could simply ignore the special permit and refile all over again. which would put it under the amended ordinance relating to calculation of GFA. I suppose that's one way they could go. The recalculation of GFA, if it were exempted, would in theory also allow them to change the building to have the building have a different mass. I think that's another option they would have. I mean, presumably they could, the special permit was based upon a particular set of plans that were approved, and so to change the mass, they would have to either seek an amendment or to, ignore that special permit and start all over again.
So, I understand what you're saying. I could imagine the special permit that was granted in 2015 being worded in a way that required a payment prior to any other aspects of the special permit, going forward. I don't think it is read that ambiguously, but it could. And then I would worry about this planning board's authority to basically annul a asset that has been granted to the city. And so I think the petitioner's reading of the situation is persuasive, that this is not a city's asset at the moment. But I would certainly appreciate a opinion of the city solicitor on this, because given that it's a matter of first impression, and given that we don't have the statutory authority to incur liability on behalf of the city, I would want to make sure that we are not doing that.
I have no objection to that personally. I've been struggling with this provision, since it was clear that we were going to hear this, as to exactly what it means and, what powers do we have and the impact it may have. Certainly from my point of view, if this provision had not been adopted and CDD had determined what the cost of the parking spots were and they objected to that, they would have to challenge it somewhere else rather than here.
I'm also pretty confident that if they had paid the city, we would not have the authority to require the city to give them a refund. So that seems like a technicality that's worth getting looked at by the city solicitor.
Okay.
There might be a couple of allied matters that we might ask the solicitor. One is whether it's appropriate for us to amend a decision, should we make the proper findings, or whether it's appropriate that it be the permit granted be abandoned and be reapplied for. I would hope the solicitor would say if the effect of the two actions is the same, we can do the one that is easier and less timely to accomplish. The other has to do with the lot area change.
Mm-hmm.
I think, again, we would want to reflect that we now understand 96 Winthrop is not on the lot. The decision is based on drawings that says it is. So we should clean that up.
Clean that up, yes.
And whether that's something the city solicitor wants to advise us on or not,
Right.
I don't know. I wouldn't think so, but.
Although with regard to the removal of that lot, my understanding is that that has no impact on the ultimate calculation of whether, if the basement were exempted, it falls below 80%. It would,
Yeah.
including, is it 96? It would still fall below 80%, and if you exclude 96, it falls slightly lower than 80%. But I think, yes, it's a question that could be asked of the city solicitor about, or for CDD to consider, how's the best way to handle that and amend that. I mean, we certainly have been changing lot lines in many other special permits, and certainly in the large PUDs at Cambridge Crossing and elsewhere.
So do we want to then continue this until we get that opinion, or?
I think that would be appropriate,
Can we, before we leave it though, and forgive me, perhaps I didn't do as much homework as I should have. Can we review exactly what the new provision is with regard to exempting the basement space?
Surely.
Is that a discretionary
No.
call? Or
Well, it is based upon, all right, so the ordinance says gross floor area shall not include, and then number 15 is any basement or cellar living space in any single-family or two-family home. Obviously, that doesn't apply, but then number 16 is any basement or cellar living space in any other type of structure with the issuance of a special permit. In granting such a special permit, the permit granting authority may approve the exemption of any portion of gross floor area located in a basement or cellar from the calculation of GFA, provided the permit granting authority finds that the uses occupying such exempted GFA support the character of the neighborhood or district in which the applicable lot is located.
So it is discretionary.
It is discretionary, but I'm not quite sure what, how far that discretion goes in determining whether something supports the character of the neighborhood or district in which the lot is located.
I think when we've run into this in the past, it's been in the context of a residential property.
Well, we have used it with regard, I think we exempted the Abbott building renovation recently. I mean, this is only a year and a half old. It was added. It was a citizen petition that brought it about. And so, we haven't used it a lot, but it has been used a couple of times. And, the parking exemption and the 80% factor only applies in the Harvard Square Overlay District. So that's been limited in its use or application.
What do you think is the underlying policy?
Of which?
Exemption.
For parking?
No, of the exemption of the basement
of the
level
GFA
for calculation of GFA for.
I think in commercial districts, it's to allow for lower rent retail that would be supportive, or a retailer. I mean, if having that huge basement full of office supplies might not happen if they were up on the ground floor because of the rent structures.
How do you think that policy goal applies to this situation?
I think given that particular user, it's logical to assume that having that basement space is very valuable. It contributes to the community and the district and the other uses in the district, and that
I could, if I can jump in, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I could also argue that this particular space was not the type of space that was anticipated.
And it's existing.
And I mean, it has been used as very valuable rental property for many, many years. The application reminds me there was once a movie theater there. There's been a restaurant there, I think, time immemorial. Staples has been there for quite some time. But exactly how this should be interpreted, I think, maybe for the city solicitor to give us some further direction.
The language of the ordinance is a little it's a little wishy-washy.
Non-specific.
Right.
Right. I mean, yes, my recollection was that it was intended, for storage space that, was pertinent to a first floor level. I think for single and two-family houses, there was a different rationale.
Right.
That, that was to allow for renovations that would otherwise create problems.
Yeah.
But with regard to other structures, it's an issue. And, I think the Abbott building, it was unclear what they were plan was for it, but I don't think it was retail. I think it was for storage and other related activities.
So
they got rid of the basements until the passage of that provision, and then they restored them. And I think if they had not gotten a special permit, they would have just filled in that volume of space.
So part of the issue is that the fee was increased.
Right, that's pretty shocking, but to me, I think the idea that it would cost $100,000 to build a parking space in Harvard Square is not beyond reason.
No.
And so I'm not criticizing the department for
I'm just
doing
wondering
their
about
job.
the grandfathering. The grandfathering, I guess, only applies if when you pull a building permit, and yet we did grant the special permit.
Well, grandfathering usually protects you from zoning change.
Yeah.
Keeping you under the old zoning rather than having to comply with newer requirements.
Well, here it would protect you from the fee.
Here they're trying to impose or use the newer requirements to eliminate the fee. And I've had a lot of difficulty with this, and I certainly support the concept
But
of
the older fee was lower.
letting the city solicitor give us some guidance on where we can go, whether we can go anywhere with this, and where we can go with it.
But I'm sorry, when the special permit was granted, was the fee lower?
Yes.
At that point, right. So the grandfathering sort of goes in both directions.
Well, no, because the ordinance says the fee will be calculated by CDD in accordance with certain principles. So it wasn't established at that point as to the amount it would be.
Right. But it was lower at the time the special permit was granted.
If CDD can respond to that,
Historically, some of your permits have included the calculation and said this is what the fee is. This permit didn't do it. This permit said that the fee will be determined and left it completely open.
Yes, sure. Iram Farouk, Community Development. I'll give you my card after instead of spelling. The fee, we spent a lot, this fee had not been really looked at in detail for a long time. And if you think about what that number was that was pointed out, it's not consistent with what it costs to build parking anywhere in the city of Cambridge, unless it's surface parking. And we went through a fairly extensive process working with inspectional services, the law department, assessing, and actually talking to a number of people who are building parking in different parts of the city. And there hasn't been a ton in Harvard Square specifically, but also getting a sense of what the likelihood of what the likely costs of parking are. And we looked at a range and then essentially picked the mean, and they were fairly close to each other. So based on that, we came up with the number. We have a memo. I think it might even be posted on the website, like the background calculation information, but we provided it to the proponent. We're happy to provide it to the board if you don't have it already. I do want to make sure that the solicitor's office likes to have an official vote of the board if they're looking for an opinion. So I just want to make sure that you do that. And also, there are folks here for public comment. So if the board is continuing the matter, you might want to hear public comment.
I don't know what the purpose of public comment would be if we don't know where we're going to go with it. I mean, I think it would just be a waste of everyone's time, because public may convince us one way or the other, but until we have clarification from the city solicitor as to the extent of what we can do, I don't seem that would serve a purpose. It's certainly unfortunate if anybody came this evening to make public comment that it gets continued and they'd have to come again, but that happens occasionally, and I apologize to them if that's where we end up, but I don't see the point of taking public comment on it right now.
Can you please use the microphone?
Please sit down. We can have this discussion. Well, personally, I agree and think we ought to vote to ask the city solicitor to give us their opinion as to what authority the planning board has to amend the special permit, which requires payment of money to the city under these particular circumstances, and also if they feel capable of it, to give us some guidance or opinion with regard to the new definition of the exemption to gross floor area for other than a single or two-family structure, which they may feel is, and the opinion I think could say that it's up to the planning board or the BZA or the building inspector in the first instance to make that determination. But if they have an opinion on the scope, I think we would welcome it. Could I have such a motion?
So move.
Second. All those in...
Before you vote, I'm sorry.
You better have something awfully important to interrupt us right now.
I did want to suggest that public comment might, John Hawkinson, that public comment might scope your direction to the city solicitor, and that could be important.
I don't think so. I think we're capable of determining what we wish to ask the city solicitor. So we had a motion and a second. All those in favor? There's unanimous request to the city solicitor, and this hearing will be continued until a date to be determined after we receive the opinion of the city solicitor. And I apologize to all people who came who wanted to give us some public comment. We will welcome it once we know exactly how we can proceed. So thank you all very much. There are now 2 matters of general business, and everyone is welcome to stay and listen to that. And Hugh, I'd ask you to take over with regard to the first matter.
Are the St. James people ready to proceed, or do we need to take a 5-minute break to let them? Is there anyone here? Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute recess.
I have to go after 9. Do you anticipate that the next two things are going to last much longer?
That happened because Ted recused himself and Catherine's gone, and I am the senior member as our rules call for. All right, so general business item and planning board case 241, the St. James Church housing, and we've got a study. So you want to explain what it is you want to do? And
okay. Yes, I'm Phil Terzis with Acorn Holdings. We're the owners and developers of the St. James Place Church project. We're here today to just give you an update on a change that we'd like to make to the building design on the 4th floor decks that we had submitted to community development earlier, and we had thought it might be an administrative decision or change, and they thought it would be good for us to just present it to you at the planning board just so that you're aware that this change is possibly in the works. Essentially what happened was we have transitioned a building. We were going to have it as rental units, and we're finding there's a demand for condominiums, so we're transitioning probably to sell the units. And what we found with talking to potential buyers is that they were not all that keen on having a common roof deck. They actually like the idea of being able to have individual roof decks that they can purchase and have some privacy on the roof. So this is showing what was once a common roof deck being sort of redistributed and divided up into individual roof decks. And that affects the deck shape, not the area. The overall area of decks will remain the same. There will be partitions added, and the fenestration of the building to allow for individual access from the units is also changed. So some of you are, I think, fairly familiar with the project, so I can't even press buttons without glasses here. This is the 4th floor plan, which shows, this is the proposed, that what was originally under our special permit. So we have units on one side of the building facing a courtyard and the church, and these decks. And this deck here was to be a common deck that would be shared by all building residents. And then these individual decks, some of them are off of the corridor, would be available for purchase or originally for rent. And then there are a few decks like these ones here and here and here that are actually attached to units and would come with the unit. So if I'm going to toggle back and forth maybe a few times so you can see the difference between this plan and the proposed. What we're looking at doing is taking this deck and running it around the corner and then dividing it up. These two decks will shrink, and we add a divider here so that this unit and this unit don't communicate through that deck. And then here we'll have the same deck, but the a little less window here. So I'll go to the next slide, which shows the change. You can see how these decks have moved away from the edge of the building, and these have become a continuous deck with partitions. And instead of a wall of glass along here, we're having individual openings, sort of a door and side light kind of combination so that people can get out to their decks. This deck here remains more or less the same, but we've reduced the amount of glazing on here, partly because the unit is not that large, the living space is not that large, and we had potential buyers saying they just didn't like, where am I going to put my TV, where am I going to put my couch? It's just too much window. So we've looked at reducing the window there, and then adding the partition here at this deck. So I'll just toggle back to what we had before so you can just sort of see the change again. There to there. And the next series of slides just take views from around the neighborhood, starting over sort of in the upper right corner and moving around the building so you can see the impact of these partitions for the view from the neighbor's viewpoint. In some places they're not visible at all, but in others it shows up a little bit. So this is looking from 28 Orchard Street. The original design had more glazing along here and no partitions between the decks. The new design reduces the glazing and adds these partitions. This is from 38 Orchard. Original design, and then you'll see a little change right over here, I believe, where we add a partition that's visible. This is, again, the original design from 38 Orchard, looking up from a little bit higher, more like from their second floor windows. And you see the difference with these partitions. 42 Orchard. And the partitions show not a lot from the first floor, but when you go up a level, they show more. Blake Street. This is around the corner from Orchard Street, going more towards the fire station, which is on Mass Ave. And then that's the new partition showing up in this area. And from a higher view, see more of the partitions. And then 22 Blake, new and original design, only because you don't see any changes from this level. And from the second level, there are no changes in this part of the building. From Mass Ave, 2029 Mass Ave is actually a fire station. So no real visible changes on this facade. And here, the only change you'd see from Mass Ave is the addition of that partition between these two units. And from Beach Street, this is the area where we're reducing the glazing in that one unit. Right now, it's kind of a wall of glass, and we're reducing it to a couple of larger windows. There's more wall there. And these are elevations. This is Beach Street, which there are no changes visible from Beach Street. This is the courtyard facing the church. You'll see the change will be that partition between the two decks. And the south elevation, again, this is facing Mass Ave. That's that partition from Mass Ave. And south courtyard, okay, this is also facing the church. No view, no changes there. And this is probably the most impact here on this side, where you start to see these partitions showing up. And again, this is the most impactful because the glazing changes most on this elevation. That. And these are the materials we're looking at, sort of a gray beige for decking and the partitions, some kind of Trex product, recycled milk bottle product. And that's it.
Will the owners in the building also have access to the common space in the courtyard between the church and the...
They have the same access as the general public, which is dawn to dusk. Yeah.
So what action is being requested?
I think we're being asked to advise the staff as to whether this is a significant change or not. Whether
I didn't hear, what kind of change? A significant change?
Yeah, so I'll do my spiel again. So this is a project that's in the continuing design review phase, which means that it's subject to staff review, and the condition of the special permit is the design should remain in substantial conformance with the original approval by the planning board. And this is a case that is probably testing the meaning of the word continuing in terms of review, and it's interesting in that it has been a while, and I think maybe Hugh was the only member of the planning board that was on the planning board when this was originally reviewed. But it is, as Hugh said, customary for us to seek some guidance comments from the planning board when there's a change that we need some assistance or help in making a determination about whether it's consistent with the original approval.
Well, I would certainly offer my opinion that this is not a significant change.
Anyone else wish to comment?
It doesn't seem like a significant change to me, but and it doesn't really bother me, other than that I sort of worry as time goes on if the condo documents are not strong enough that who knows what will happen to those petitions. They could get somebody will see it as it is their space, right? So why not paint one green or another one? There needs to be guide or things attached in the documents. Like in one of my condos, I can't change the color of my house.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it would be nice if there was a way to soften them. I mean, it would be interesting if there was a way to do some greenery up there to make that whole edge a little different. But those are just personal things. I wouldn't say that constitutes.
So you would, following up on the combining those two suggestions, you want to make sure that it would be okay for the person who's buying that space to actually install, planters and plants that are in containers, say.
Yeah.
So I had a tour a year or so ago of a patio that I had designed on the 10th floor of a building, and they had this tenant who had just decorated it like mad, and it was like almost a jungle up there, and it was marvelous. And it's 10 stories up, nobody sees it, but when you're on it, it's an extraordinary asset to his apartment. So I think condo owners tend to want to do that kind of thing, and just makes it look more domestic, more lived in, look more like somebody's deck in their own house. Any other comments? So Jeff, do you have
I think those comments are sufficient. Thank you very much. We'll make sure that's communicated back throughout the staff, and we can continue working on it.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Take care.
So I guess now, is Ted gone home, or is he?
No, he's
Okay, so let's get him back in the driver's seat.
panels, so they're solid black
Yeah,
panels,
okay.
not right, so like Signify or whatever. Without gaps.
Oh, that's a nice project. How about one of those? Oh, okay. There's a parking garage.
Got it.
Okay, and the next piece of general business we have is with regard to an application for a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals with regard to 808 to 812 Memorial Drive. It's a variance for dimensional relief for the renovation of an existing non-conforming multifamily dwelling. Is the proponent here?
Yes.
You want to proceed?
My name is Jane Carbone. I work for HRI. We're a housing nonprofit developer in Cambridge, and I'm here with my architect from Brunner-Cott, Sean Dempsey. HRI, this building, 808 Memorial Drive, was built in the 70s under an affordable housing law that was created to support affordable housing back in the 70s. So it was it's a mixed-use development, and there's 212 units that are affordable, 89 a market, and about 40,000 square feet of commercial space. HRI purchased the building in 1997 with the support of the tenants and did a modest renovation to the building, basically correcting quite a number of significant deficiencies that existed when the building was built. When we first purchased the building, of the 300 units, during a heavy rainstorm, about 260 of those units leaked, the windows in the actual envelope. So over the years, we have been trying to correct the deficiencies of the building, and in the next year, we are going to be refinancing the development, maintaining the long-term affordability of the development, and also putting in a large capital plan. So in order for us to do that, there are three variances that we're seeking. One is to, unfortunately, the exterior of the envelope is quite deficient, and our structural engineer is saying that the cladding is like Swiss cheese. The rib face block is basically deteriorating, and the caulk joints are deteriorating, and the windows are failing. So the only way that we can make this building more efficient is to remove the rib face block and then install exterior cladding. And under the current zoning, you're allowed to, under the Article 22, you're allowed to increase the envelope and add additional insulation, but on one side of this building, the relief you have is up to 4 inches of insulation. But if we remove the cladding and we add if we remove the existing concrete and rib face block and add the cladding that we want, the envelope thickness is about 8.5 inches. So we are seeking relief for one of the setbacks, the side yard setback that cladding encroaches on. The other item that we want to do is, when we met with the fire department, they want to be able to have the opportunity to fight the fire and come in a separate entrance rather than the residents exiting out the same door in the event of a fire or another event. They want to be able to separately enter the building to the fire command center. So we want to expand the lobby so that we could create a separate entrance for the firefighters, so that when they're fighting a fire, they can go in and address the fire command center rather than deal with residents that are coming out of the building. And then third variance, this property is multifamily housing, basically, even though it's a high-rise, and the requirement now is to seek lead under the City of Cambridge ordinance, but again, we feel that that doesn't really address other issues besides the envelope. And what we want to, we're seeking to go for Enterprise Green Communities, which is a more affordable housing, multifamily-based green criteria. That the difference is that some of the requirements on green Enterprise Green Communities focus on the health of the resident and programs that you create to encourage mobility and exercise and physical health improvements in the development. So unlike LEED, that has that as a point system, those are requirements in the Enterprise Green Communities criteria. So we wanted to switch from the LEED to the Enterprise Green Communities. And similar to a project that we have under construction now, another affordable housing development on Concord Ave, that relief was granted under the prior project as well. So those are the three variances that we seek, and I'll turn it over to our architect that can kind of show you exactly some of those details that I talked about that we're seeking a variance for.
Thank you, Jane. My name is Sean Dempsey. I work with Brunner Cott. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through the variance items on the project, and then at the end of the slides, I'll show you our current thinking in terms of how we are going to overclad the project. We'll start with just this overview here of the site itself. 808 and 812 Memorial Drive. 812 is the high-rise. It's about 20 stories. It is 20 stories, 19 stories, sorry. And then 808 is the smaller building that's off to the side. This site diagram shows us part of the zoning language that Jane referenced with the 4 inches. There's also a qualification for if you're within, if you bypass the 7'2" setback for your overcladding. The sort of magenta area in this diagram is the 7'2" setback related to that. So when we overclad our project, we actually don't go into that. I just wanted to clarify that for the group. I'll step 2. So the first item I'll speak to is the entry lobby that Jane mentioned, which we were hoping to expand roughly 650 square feet. And here is an existing on the left-hand side and proposed on the right. The area in blue is where we are proposing to expand our lobby space. On the right-hand side of the proposed drawing, you can see a fire command center. That's what Jane was mentioning. So currently the fire command panels are exposed in the entry lobby of this space, and there's a single door that gets you in and out. So there's a major issue there. We're proposing to expand the footprint, add a fire command center, which allows the firefighters to come in separately and also to sort of keep themselves out of the way of people exiting. We reviewed this with the CFD and they appreciated that as well. So this is the first item that is on the list for a variance.
Is there a roof over the area that you're expanding in already?
Yes, there is, yes. If
you're sort of infilling the porch.
Right, so if you can see where my hand is here, this little dashed line, that's the actual overhang of the building. So we're not necessarily expanding the footprint. We are, but we're not, I guess. So all of this, this is also the existing line of the building above in the proposed state. So we will expand within the overall footprint of the building above. So thank you. That's very helpful.
Now, for the variance is what? This increases your GFA
Yes.
beyond what is allowed?
Beyond what is allowed, right, right. The, so part of these we just wanted to review with you all, make sure that we had the same interpretation, make sure we're going in the right direction here. So the second item is related to the overcladding that we discussed. I'm going to show you 3 examples of the 3 kind of primary conditions at the building. This is the first one. This happens everywhere. The red zone is where we propose to take the existing masonry block off. And then the item on the drawing on the left shows what we're proposing to do to provide a new overcladding system, new insulation, and also make it, aesthetically pleasing. When we do the math on this, we get to roughly 8 inches. Initially, we were much deeper than that, but we've kind of been working really hard to reduce our expansion of the project. So this particular one, it's roughly 8 inches. It shows you on the right-hand side. The big end walls of these buildings, they're just precast. Similar issue. When you go and put a new cladding on, you're beyond 4 inches. And then here's the third typical condition. So these slides just are intended to show you that we can't do it within that 4-inch requirement. And then here's a few progress elevations of how we are thinking of the overcladding itself. Essentially, the buildings are really big and they're really prominent, and the end walls are they're just solid concrete. It's kind of not a great view when you come off the highway. Everybody knows this, but so we're working hard to try to balance that issue and not making something so busy and so that a couple years down the road you might say, well, that was from like 2000 whatever. So we want to try to avoid that. It's difficult, but we find that the buildings themselves are very sort of active anyway. There's balconies that project on the low rise. There's balconies that are inset on the high rise, and there's a lot of jogs in the project. So with that in mind, some of the building already does it for you. So the cladding zones can kind of be a little more relaxed and subdued, we think. I'll just walk through these a little more. So here's another view from a little bit further down the riverside. You can see the mass of the building, the low rise on the side. Here's a view from the park across the street, looking sort of head on to the buildings. And here's a view from River Street in front of Whole Foods. The mass is the mass, and we're trying to make it a little less daunting. So the next slide I have shows a before and after of the high-rise building. So on the right-hand side, right now there's windows that jog. There's a lot of balconies. For simplicity's sake, we're trying to remove that jog so that we can have better detailing at our windows and less issue of rain penetration or down the road. So then we'll just it'll be left with these sort of major vertical elements where the cladding falls, and then everything else will be either a window or a balcony for the project. And the same logic applies to the other building, or the low-rise building. Extent of what we have for you today. So, and as Jan had mentioned, we are seeking the Enterprise Green Communities variance, and I think she covered all the reasoning why it suits this project type better than what we've seen in the lead requirements.
Excuse me, I wanted to look at the slide with cladding again, please, and ask if you could talk about the materials that you're using.
Here?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that white space actual empty space, or is that?
Yeah, so So this, if you can see a red line, I know it's kind of difficult. That is the extent of the existing red masonry block. So when we pull that away, there is a void here. Initially, we thought, well, why don't we just tuck it all in to that void space? The issue is the structure won't allow us to reclad bearing down on the deck. We have to come around to the front of the existing deck, as we show here, to support our system. And in doing so, you increase your separation from the existing facade.
So the reason I'm asking, and I'm not a construction person, so other members of the board can help me understand this. I'm thinking about Grenfell Towers and how people think that the cladding was the cause of that fire moving so quickly, especially the space between the building and the cladding. So I want to know how you're
yes, that's number one on all of our minds all the time. So the system that we've selected and we're working with the manufacturer, they provide testing for the system, and they also give certification essentially for NFPA 285, which is this thing for smoke. All of the issues that were present at that England Tower. So we're working with them. The intent is that the system that we have will be certified, and that it'll compartmentalize the outboard side, so that it doesn't go inside.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So the shaded areas that line up with the concrete blank are basically, in the new construction, are areas that are solid, filled with materials that prevent
yes,
it's
like
smoke.
a fire stop, essentially. Yeah. Right.
Well, I was lines were.
Okay.
So, if I understand you, you said the cladding was not going to extend into the setback area and
right.
violate the setback.
So this is in the Memorial Drive Overlay District.
Yeah.
And our interpretation of the language is that the building as it exists conforms, not existing non-conforming. The language of the overcladding piece of this has a clause for 7'2" from the property line, that you couldn't go beyond that. So the magenta here shows you 7'2" from the property line, and the point of the slide is to indicate that our new overcladding doesn't expand into the 7'2" no zone.
Right. So I don't quite understand what you need the variance for,
Mr. Chair. So the zoning currently only allows a 4-inch additional intrusion if you have an existing non-conforming wall. I think that's part of the issue, is that there are maybe formula setback requirements that making the existing conditions non-conforming. So the zoning says if you have a non-conforming wall, you can put up to 4 inches of additional insulation, sort of encroaching further into the setback. That's actually something we've been working on along with another one of the variances they're requesting, that using the Enterprise Green Communities standard. We've been working with, through the implementation of the Net Zero Action Plan, to amend parts of the zoning that would allow additional insulation up to 8 inches from the existing on a pre-existing non-conforming condition, and to allow alternative rating systems, including the Enterprise Green Communities.
Just that I'm clear, so it is non-conforming now as to the current setback requirements.
That's my understanding based on the proposal. I haven't run the numbers of it myself, but I presume that was the determination at Inspectional Services. I think the point to be made is there are two parts of the zoning now. One says it can't be more than 4 inches from the existing if it's non-conforming, and another provision says in no circumstance can it go closer than 7 feet 2 inches from the lot line. So this thing is just demonstrating that it's still well within that the 7 foot 2 inches.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's right.
All right, board members, any questions, additional questions? So then I guess the question for us is, do we want to take any action? We could do nothing, just let it go to the board, or we could support the applications, or we could be opposed to the applications.
I guess the question I would have is whether Eric or Suzanne have reviewed this, and if they have any advice that we should pass on to the zoning board. Not that we can't generate our own advice, but
Eric Thorpelson again. So, yeah, Susanna gave me some notes just a little bit before the meeting. These really had to do with aesthetics of the cladding system rather than these other issues. But in the documents we have, the balcony railings appeared to be solid, which seemed to take away a little bit of the detail and kind of visual interest in the building. It looks like here, though, that they're actually shown as open railings. So, okay, so that seems like a sensible aspect of the building to retain. One of the elevations, the big tall elevation, I think the one facing on the tallest tower of the building, there were basically the pattern is a variegated pattern of several different colors of panel that sort of start out strong at the bottom and sort of fade out at the top, which seems like a reasonable approach. There were some vertical lighter strips, narrow lighter strips, and we were wondering if it might look nice if those continued farther up. These are really sort of fussy aesthetic just questions. And then the variegated panels, there are two different panel systems, the vertical ones that are quite basically a floor tall, and then in the zones, the vertical zones between balconies, the horizontal panels that are, right, so you see the horizontal patterns panel, it looked like they were just two different colors of two different shades of metal. And we're wondering either if those should be more different shades of metal so they're more variegated, or all be the same so that they contrast. Yes. Not sure what the answer is, but it seemed a little splotchy only having two. Oh, sorry. That would help, yeah. So just basically considering the pattern of particularly the finer grained horizontal panels, just relative to visual interest and kind of the looks of the thing.
What is the material of the panels?
It's metal. It's metal. It's a metal panel system. Are they rain screen metal panel, integral insulation, I imagine, and
inboard, yes.
Yeah, yep. And satisfies all your fire requirements.
Yes.
We also, will it be rigid, flat, look crisp and well, kind of.
Yeah.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Yeah.
Could you take one of the...
Actually, we should be not discussing through... Yes, we want to be talking to the board. Here, you use this.
Yes, I'll use this one. Thank you. Thank you. So
yeah, just is this turning off? Sorry.
Yes.
There. Just wanted to be sure that the materials appear solid,
yes,
substantial.
they will. Yeah,
crisp.
we're actually investigating a few different textures on them, but they will all be solid, and there will be more of a color variation than it would be any kind of texture or thing like that. That's our current direction.
Okay. Yeah, those were the things.
So we might offer.
Thank you.
The zoning board could condition their thing on continuing design review by the community development department staff.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense.
And we might also comment that it looks like it's going to be a substantial improvement over the present project within the constraints of the building, and they're working very carefully to take advantage of what other opportunities exist to make the buildings be better in their prominent location.
I'm not familiar enough with them, so is there any argument against the use of the other green rating system rather than LEED?
I've been looking at the criteria right now, and I think that as long as HRI holds the community welfare as its primary concern, that it could be okay, but there are a lot of things where if a person were a bad actor, they could say, they could get a lot of points for things that are already true. So for example, you get points if you're close to a bus, points if you're close to a park, points for certain things that already exist. But at the same time, a person could say, yes, we already have that and that's wonderful. Let's make sure that we're also being environmentally friendly in the ways that LEED is more, the more familiar LEED criteria are.
Well, LEED also has lots of location and other points. And so, in that way, they're probably similar. I'm not familiar with this particular green standard, but if Jeff has indicated that a city task force has looked at it and feels they are equivalent, I think we can accept that.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that is a recommendation that we're currently working to implement. I can't speak to it much myself, but it has been reviewed by our staff, and that'll be the recommendation going forward.
Just the difference between LEED and Enterprise Green Communities is the LEED gives you points for healthy living environment and resident engagement, where the Enterprise Green Communities has it as a requirement. It also has as a requirement an O&M manual and resident education on green and sustainable living, which is the reason why we want to incorporate that Enterprise Green Community, because it's more of a housing residential based criteria versus LEED is more of a commercial building criteria. And LEED for homes, this doesn't qualify because it's a high rise. And I mean, HRI has done green communities, Enterprise Green Communities on all of our developments, whether it's required or not, as in our affordable housing. And so this criteria, the Enterprise Green Communities, this would be a LEED silver if it were to be switched.
All right, so I guess we have a motion to recommend to the BZA that they grant the requested variances with a suggested condition that the design of the project continue to be reviewed or be subject to review by CDD design staff. And I guess part of the recommendation that we think it will end up with a superior building to what is currently present.
So move.
Second. All those in favor? Thank you and good luck. And I don't think we have anything else before us, so we are adjourned.